Good morning, everyone. I am Colleen Haas, and I'm an instructor in the history department at Indiana State University. My role there is to teach courses on history and culture of Africa. And today I'll be conducting an interview with Kelvin Arthur and Abdul Wadud Wakubu on religion in Africa. Just a quick background, Kelvin and Abdul Wadud are graduate students in our history department, and they have agreed to discuss with us today some topics that they have some experience with and some perspective on. So, thank you for being at this forum today as I continue to lead these discussions on Africa and cultural traditions. I'm grateful to you guys today to have your perspectives on this topic. So I will turn it over to you. I don't know who would like to go first, but give us a brief background about yourselves.
Okay. Um, my name is Kelvin Athan. I'm from Ghana, like Dr. Han said. I attended Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Um, I had a bachelor's in history as well. I'm from Accra, which is in the southern part of Ghana. It is the capital town of Ghana. It's an amazing place to be. And my religious background, I'm a charismatic. So that's my background.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, and my name is Abdul Wadud Yakubu, and I'm also from Ghana. I graduated from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and I'm a Muslim, and I'm basically an indigene of a northern Ghana. However, I stay in the southern part of Ghana in a city called Kumasi, which is the second largest city in Ghana.
Mhm. Great. Well, let's get started on our conversation today. Um, so, what I'd like to begin with is just a brief background, like the historical arrival and integration of various religions on the continent of Africa. And of course, today, particularly, we're concentrating on Christianity and Islam, but we should acknowledge that there's indigenous religions as well that are part of the social life in Africa. So we'll start under the heading of Christianity. And so I'm going to focus this first question to you, Kelvin. What historical or contemporary factors have most significantly shaped the growth of Christianity, either in Africa overall or in Ghana?
Um, that's a good question. First of all, Christianity coming to Ghana, or Christianity in Ghana especially, is very interesting. The Portuguese came in 1471. They introduced the Catholic faith. Subsequently, the other denominations such as the Basel missionaries and the Wesleyan missionaries also introduced their faith in the subsequent centuries, which is the 19th century. But one of the major contributing factors is the introduction of formal education by these missionaries. They introduced vocational training and some form of formal education, which attracted a lot of Africans, leading to the spread of Christianity in Ghana. Also, another contemporary factor is the Pentecostal and charismatic movements of the 20th century. Africans drew a lot of parallels between these movements and the traditional African religion, which is focusing on healing, communal worship, and some form of um, divination.
Mm.
Yes. Another one, it's another contemporary factor is the social and economic benefits of the Christian groups. Most churches are providing some form of social reliefs or social services to Africans, especially in Ghana, during economic hardship or political instability.
Mm. Great. Thank you. Um, Abdul Wadud, let's shift our focus to Islam. What are the historical networks then that have the most influence on the spread or the development or even the character of Islam on the African continent and in your country?
Yeah.
So basically, Islam in Africa, I think historians sometimes limit it to uh, the trans-Saharan trade. However, the first hijrah, which is the migration of Muslims from Mecca to Medina, is regarded as the first hijrah. However, Islam first came to Africa before it even went into some part of Saudi Arabia. So in modern day Saudi Arabia, there is a city called Medina, which is regarded as the city of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, before Islam got to Medina, the Muslims in Mecca migrated from Mecca to Abyssinia, which is modern day Ethiopia. They went there because they were being persecuted in Mecca. So the Prophet kind of recommended that since the Muslims are being persecuted in their home country, they should migrate to a place where they will be welcome. And the place was in Africa, which is Ethiopia. More often so, for Western Africa to experience Islam, it was through trade with the Northern Africans across the Sahara Desert. So basically, the Muslim traders who crossed the Sahara to visit West Africa were predominantly Muslims, and they were the tribes called the Berbers. So they are kind of like a mixture of Arabs and Africans. So they were classified as the Berbers. So it was through them that Islam, that people in West Africa got to know about Islam. So the first convert of Islams were basically the traditional rulers. So these traders were able to convince the traditional rulers in southern and western part of Africa to kind of embrace Islam. What kind of got these leaders to kind of adopt Islam as a religion was because of the kind of education that these Berbers had, these traders who came there had. So they were literate enough to be able to read and write. So during the 7th century down to the 12th century, most West Africa and part of Southern Africa were not literate. We didn't develop any writing skill. So it was these Muslims who came to this part of Africa, which is the Western, Southern, and the Central part of Africa, introduced a form of writing to Africa. So it kind of it can be regarded as one of the factors that kind of wowed these leaders to kind of say, oh, these people are presenting something which is novel to us, so we are open to learn. However, Islam didn't came there to kind of fill up a vacuum. Already there was a pre-existing religion in the southern countries of the Sahara, countries that are sub of the Sahara. So northern Africans like Egypt, Ethiopia, and Libya already had an interactions with the Arab world. So they were more literate than those in the sub-Saharan Africa. So notable names like Mansa Musa, who is regarded as one of the, if I may say, the richest man to ever live, converted to Islam. So his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, where he sent a lot of gold and some camels to Mecca, was kind of a display of West African world or Southern Saharan kind of world, what we possess. So Islam kind of influenced sub-Saharan Africa in terms of literacy. In terms of literacy. So some of the earliest form of our African history was even written in Arabic. Yeah, so that's the kind of influence that Islam had on sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay. It's nice for you to emphasize that because we usually learn that it was through trade, but we don't discuss as much literacy and a particular form of literacy through writing and reading. And so thank you for that perspective. Okay, well, let's shift now to kind of the underpinnings of these two faiths or these traditions that have many factions and elements, right? And so we're going to focus on religious beliefs and practices. I like to start with the belief because then it helps explain the practices, right, that correspond to those beliefs. So we're going to start with you again, Kelvin. And I'd like you to share, if you would, how have African Christian communities either adapted or interpreted Christian beliefs and practices in ways that reflect the local culture, the social structures there, or even like worldview. And you can even share anything about your own formation if you would like as well.
Okay. Um, back home in Ghana, um, back home in Ghana, we recognize spiritual leaders or prophets. Yes, we recognize spiritual leaders and prophets. So we believe that spiritual leaders are guides and they help us understand what is happening in what we call as the spiritual world. And this echoes traditional cultures as well, because traditionally or traditional people also believe in spiritual leaders and also believe them to be guides to assist them interpret some of the things going on in their lives. So we drop to Christians, especially charismatic people or people who believe in the charismatic faith, believe that these spiritual leaders in the church provide guides for us. So personally, my church, we have a spiritual leader. So he will be able to tell you or assist you with certain problems you have, even if it's physical. We try to draw spiritual connections to physical events. So if you have a problem, you go to your spiritual leader, you explain what is happening, then he might be able to guide you that, oh, okay, you need to do this and that. And this is some form of, and this is in connection with our formal traditional practices. We also believe in healing. Yes. And it's also in line with traditional practices before, because if these charismatic faiths do not, sorry, these charismatic faiths do not do these things, I don't think most of Africans would be attracted to the Christian faith. So we find it easier to relate to Christianity because we were already practicing some of these things before Christianity came on board. Yes. So these are some of the parallels we have between Christianity and the traditional faith. I think it's the major factor. or pulling factor for a lot of Christians, or yes, a pulling factor for a lot of Christians to come into um, the faith. Yes,
So those are beliefs, and so one practice you articulated was you have you look to your spiritual leaders for assistance or guidance
yes,
with everyday life,
yes,
and including physical challenges and healing.
yes.
Is there any other practices that you think are distinctive? Sometimes when there are our own traditions we don't realize, but it might be interesting just to, explain what are some other practices. Is there practices that are recommended like personal prayer or going to a church service, or what other practices are there in your experience?
Just like I think giving of alms. Yes. So we like to, or it's mandatory to give to the poor. And usually in the traditional setting, it's also recommended that you give alms to the poor for some kind of spiritual benefit or spiritual blessing. Yes. So this is one of the major practices we do in our church. That is also in line with the traditional faith. Yes. So giving of alms is a big thing. Easter, Christmas, any of the major Christian holidays, we like to gather together, get some things, move to the orphanages, move to the prisons, and even the beggars on the street. We try to give something to these groups of people to kind of help them alleviate their poverty, at least some form of social assistance or social service.
Great. Yeah, that's something I bet is common across all these religious
Yeah,
practices. But it's nice that you mentioned that, giving of alms or
yeah,
charity.
charity.
Can I just ask you one more question?
Sure.
So, how are you encouraged as a young person to develop in your faith? What do they recommend that you do? That's one very important, right? Is to set aside either help, assistance, or particularly in financial. But are there other areas?
Yes. One, it's we are usually advised to constantly read our Bibles or the scriptures. We are also advised to try and attend church services as often as possible. So on a daily basis, we have in our church back in Ghana, we have a routine where we are supposed to meet every 6 a.m. for prayers and reading of our Bibles. So we meet as a group. It could be online, it could be in person to read our Bibles. And on Sundays, we are usually encouraged to be in church and form some form of um, communal groups to check each other and to help us build our faith in Christianity. Yes, I think those are the strategies or mechanisms our church leaders have in place to help us grow our Christian faith.
Yes. Good. Thank you. I appreciate that, elucidating more of that process. Yeah. Abdul, I'm going to turn to you. In your personal experience, how have you been formed in your faith? And how have some of these Islamic teachings or leaders shaped social life where you are from? And you could address anything, kinship, moral authority, how you work on conflicts, anything. Yeah.
Yes, so basically, in African setting, there's more a sense of community among people. I would say individualism is not encouraged in an African setting. So Islam is also kind of Islam disapproved individualism in a way. So this kind of integrate with our African way of life. So Islam is more a community-based religion. So being a Muslim, when I see another Muslim, I don't regard the person as being different from me, no matter the skin color, no matter the race, no matter the age, no matter the intellect. So far as we are all Muslims, we regard each other as brothers and sisters. So in an African setting, similar kind of ideology is encouraged. So it kind of shaped our way of life, even though what Islam brought, the sense of community that Islam brought, it wasn't far different from what, as Africans, we already knew in terms of forming a community. However, it's kind of reinforced in how we relate to each other. So before Islam, or let me say in a typical Islamic community, even though we are all Muslims, but we come from a different tribal groups or ethnic groups. So Islam came to kind of put stop to identifying ourselves to these groups. Let's say I'm a Northerner from Ghana. If I meet a Southerner who is a Muslim, being a Northerner doesn't mean he's different from me. However, in a typical Ghanaian setting, like these differences are recognized. Yes, it is recognized that, oh, I'm from the north, you are from the south. However, Islam kind of disapproved that we shouldn't identify ourselves with uh, the ethnic groups and or the geographical place we came from. Even though it doesn't say we shouldn't kind of totally neglect where we come from, but it kind of encourages us to see ourselves as a one particular body. So it kind of framed our way of thinking in a community sense. Also, one thing that I would say Islam kind of shaped the way of life is, let me say, leadership. So in African settings, there's kind of, let me say, we see leaders as the overall kind of, they embody the knowledge of our community, how our community have changed over time. So we kind of give them a maximum respect for being the leaders of the community. So Islam kind of also enforces individuals to respect these leaders. So for example, an Islamic cleric is kind of seen as a a person who guide individuals in terms of not only their religious practices, but about their daily life. So when somebody is getting married, before an African, we kind of see marriage as the bond between two families, not the bond between two people. So Islam also enforces such ideology of marriage not being between two, just between the people who are into this kind of contract or into this kind of partnership. It's more about the family coming together to kind of form a bond. So I will say the things that has changed, Islam made us change about our way of life is, let me say, our traditional practices of making a sacrifice to, let me say, some idols. So at the core of the Islamic belief is kind of admitting that there's no being worthy of worship except God. So the African tradition, we kind of have our smaller gods, which we believe they are intermediaries between us and God himself or the supreme being. So Islam came and said, no, there is no intermediary between a human and the supreme being, which is God. Therefore, these sacrifices we used to make to these idols, Islam came and canceled such practices and also kind of influenced our way of life.
Yeah, that's a strong distinction between traditional religious beliefs and practices, right? So the first point you made was that your religious identity will transcend your regional identity. That's a higher up on the hierarchy of your personal identity is your religious identity, not your, like you said, you don't neglect where you're from, but this becomes a common factor that's stronger than your regional identity. So that was interesting. Okay, thank you. Um, well, this is good. So let's, I just want to ask you one more thing, Abdul Wadud, about practices. Are there some, Kelvin shared some daily practices or that's common for people in his religious community. Are there some that you would like to share about things you do during your day or the year or special events or anything like that?
Yes, so uh, basically, as a Muslim, praying 5 times a day is what makes me, let me say, a Muslim. Without the prayer, you are you don't, let me say, my Islam is not full without my prayer. Yes, so when you look at the 5 pillars of Islam, the negation that there is nobody worthy of worship aside God, which is the number one thing that I believe that like there's the existence of God and I have to worship him. The second most important thing is the prayer. So when I wake up early in the morning around 5 a.m., our first, that's the first prayer we make within the day. And during the afternoon, around 1 p.m., we make the second prayer as well, which is called Asr. So the first one is called Fajr. That's the early morning prayer. The second prayer, which is in the midday, is Zuhur, rather, not Asr, Zuhur. And the third prayer is rather Asr, which is around 4 p.m. So the fourth prayer is around 6:30 p.m., which is called Maghrib. Yes, and the last prayer of the night is around 8 p.m., which is called Isha. So these are our daily practices as a Muslims. However, notwithstanding, within these prayers, there are certain things that are required as a Muslim to also engage in, which is treating people like how they want to be treated or treating people nicely. So I can't be a Muslim and kind of seeing people as kind of, let me say, seeing myself better than other people. It is not acceptable in Islam. It is regarded as an arrogance. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he indicated that among the Muslim Ummah who are part of the religion that he came to preach, those he disliked are those who have an atom of arrogancy in their way of life. So arrogancy is one of our daily, let me say, practices that we kind of took off and take out of our life. Yes. And Also, charity, as Kelvin mentioned earlier, Islam is also big on charity, which is also one of the pillars of Islam we call zakat. So as a Muslim, we have, let me say, two sets of zakat. We have the zakat, which kind of it entails maybe the kind of wealth that you've accumulated within a year. You have to take a portion of it to give it to the poor. And there's also another section of the zakat, which is more of charity, which is a daily one. So if I see somebody in need of a bottle of water and I have maybe $1, I can offer to buy the water for them. It is also a form of charity. Yes.
So you are describing a daily routine and also some aspects of the moral code like humility, which again is shared amongst Christianity too, right?
Yeah.
And then, so good, you explained that very clearly for us. Thank you. It's very interesting. Is there anything else about beliefs or practices before we move to part 3, which is contemporary life? Is there anything else either of you want to say?
Yeah. So one thing I would like to add is there are two doctrines of Islam, which is the Sunni Muslim and the Shia Muslim. So basically, the Sunni Muslim, I would say, I am a Sunni Muslim. I would say they are more of those who kind of practice Islam in its original form. And the Shia Muslim, not to be political, I would say it is kind of a political ideology than more of a doctrine. So it started off as there's one of the companions, maybe I would say in Christianity, they refer to them as disciples. So in Islam, those who kind of were with the Prophet Muhammad, we refer to them as companions of the Prophet. So one of the companions of the Prophet his name is Ali. So the people who kind of, they revered him. They revered him, and after the death of the prophet, there was kind of uh, a political misunderstanding on who to lead the Islamic group in the Middle East. So these kind of political disagreements kind of gave birth to a different group who identify themselves as Shias, even though they practice the same Islam as the Sunni Muslims. However, they have certain doctrines that the Sunnis kind of disapprove of.
Yeah, so there's some differences of how to interpret the lessons and the life of Muhammad, right? And of course, there's Sufi too, which is a third branch, right?
Yeah, so Sufism, I would say, is part of the Sunni Islam. However, their practice is more of, let me say, it's more of a spiritual cleansing, how they see it. So the Sufism is kind of, they attach spirituality in some of their activities. However, some of the Sunni Muslims see this Sufism as being kind of uh, introducing a new form of Islam. Yeah, so even though they are Sunnis in their orientation, however, they have certain kind of practices which other people within the Sunni itself do not see it as appropriate. So when you come to Africa, there's also a group called Tijaniya, followers of a leader called Tijani. So they are more of like a Sufi kind of people themselves. However, they they do not kind of distinct themselves from the Sunni Muslim. However, they also see themselves as practicing, let me say, Islam in its purest form, but they also have some additional practices, yes, in what they do.
And they're very interested perhaps in the ecstatic, heightened spiritual emotional states to they want to achieve some of those experiences, right? That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm. Wonderful. Okay. So we're at part 3. And we're going to talk about contemporary society now. Okay. And of course, I always start with Kelvin. So, Kelvin, in what ways are African Christian churches engaging with current social issues like social inequality or political participation, gender roles, public health? Do any of these things, is there any engagement with any of these kinds of issues do you see in Ghana?
Yes, I think churches are playing a big role when it comes to public services or social services. Churches, I think when it comes to economic inequality, churches are trying to bridge the gap between the poor and the rich by providing some form of social and economic reliefs. I know churches are now providing some form of microfinance schemes or small loans to businesses, which is quite interesting. Yes. I think it's interest free. They don't charge any interest on the loans. They give it out to small businesses. They also offer scholarship schemes to brilliant but needy students as well. And when it comes to public health, I think the churches in Ghana are doing a massive job when it comes to that, providing public education, providing health services. Some churches have even gone to the extent of establishing hospitals to provide free healthcare for their members, which I find a bit discriminatory, but it's still okay. You need to be a member to be able to get that social service. And when it comes to gender role, I think now the churches are doing a good job by encouraging women to take up leadership roles in the churches, which is not very, which was not very accommodating before. But now I think the churches are allowing women to take up some form of pastoral roles, leading or prominent leadership positions in the church. But some churches are also against this idea, which they also draw reference from the Bible that the women are not supposed to be leaders in the church. They are supposed to occupy other minor roles. But um, in contemporary time, women are leading the charge in the churches, which I find interesting as well. I find very interesting that women are now given this opportunity. And another one we have, I think when it comes to political issues or political matters, the churches in Ghana are now taking on a big role. Now we have something in Ghana called the nation's prophet. I don't know where it came from, but it's like a nation's prophet. I think now it's the pastor of the president occupies that informal role. It's like it's an informal role, but now it's becoming more of a thing where the lead pastor of the president or the pastor of the president occupies that position of the nation's prophet. Or if
Is it like an advisor?
some form of an
Okay.
advisor, but now it's a bit political. Now, the major pastors in Ghana all wants to be affiliated to the president to be able to occupy that role. It comes with its own benefits. Yes, and the churches are also advocating for some form of policy changes. We had some financial issues or some financial policies which were very detrimental to um, the Ghanaian community or Ghana as a whole. It was called the e-levy. So it was a tax on all electronic transactions. So the churches came together, which is the Christian Council of Ghana. It's like a council in Ghana called the Christian Council of Ghana. They came together to advocate for the abolishment of this policy by the government. So the churches are playing a massive role when it comes to policy change in Ghana. Economically, they are trying to bridge the gap between the poor and the rich by, like I just said, introducing some form of microfinance or finance institutions to help the poor in the community. When it comes to gender roles, they are doing a great they're doing a great job. And when it comes to health as well, like I mentioned earlier, public education, creating public awareness, and also organizing some form of health screening to help the local community to diagnose or to find out what is happening in their bodies. Yeah, they are doing great job when it comes to that.
Yeah, these are so interesting, these examples. Do Christian communities run schools as well?
Yes,
And for all
yes.
levels?
Now, I think for all levels, some charismatic groups or churches have been able to establish some universities. Yes, which is not free though. It's quite expensive, but at least they are doing something for the community. But when it comes to the basic level and the senior high schools, they've done a great job. The missionary schools like the Basel and the Wesley missionary groups established certain schools which are still in existence today, but they've been absorbed by the government. So the government is now taking care of these institutions. But contemporarily, there are certain basic schools by the churches, like the primary schools, the junior high schools. It's totally funded by the churches, but it's kind of private. So you need to pay some amount of money to be able to attend these schools. But if you're a member of the church, it comes with certain discounts and certain benefits you can get by attending those schools or being a member of the church. So when it comes to education too, the churches are doing very well when it comes to that. Even though we can say they can still do more, but we still appreciate what they've been able to do so far.
It's interesting that they are now taking a bigger role with the government.
Yes.
Is that, does that depend on who's in power? I mean, does that fluctuate? Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
The the office, the informal office I just mentioned, that the nation's profit. Usually, it depends on who is in government or any prophet who is able, it's funny, but who any prophet who is able to make an accurate prediction of the election. Yes, which goes in favor of the candidate who wins. So you win some form of favor. Yes. So the president automatically wants to side with you, thinking because we are more spiritual. Yes. So the president wants to side with you that in case he has any physical problems, he'll be able to consult with you and have some solution to his problem. So the churches are now entering the political space and trying to create their own office for themselves.
It's very interesting
Yeah.
how they obtained that role. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
So, Abdul Wadud, in what ways are African Muslim communities engaging with modern social issues?
Yes, so one thing that I will kind of want to touch on is conflict resolution. Yes, so in Ghana, we have the leader of the Muslim community, which the constitution recognizes as the chief imam of the country. So in times of conflict, he is one of the individuals that the government in power, any government in power, kind of uh, seek advice from or seek help from in mediating conflict among people. So it could be between conflict between Muslim communities. It could be conflict between, let me say, maybe Christian communities. He is involved in these mediations of conflict in Ghana. Not only that, he also is kind of a symbol of peace in the country. So Ghana is one of the country that has been touted as being accommodative of any religious practices. So the chief imam goes to a church service just to demonstrate that we can live together as people, regardless of our religious differences. The chief imam invites the Catholic leaders in Ghana, the Methodist leaders in Ghana to come and celebrate Islamic festivals, whether during Ramadan or even after Ramadan, to just kind of demonstrate to the whole nation and Africa that regardless of our religious differences, we are the same people and can live together. So Nigeria is one of the countries that I can cite as an example that kind of is battling with, let me say, religious conflict. However, Ghana has taken the lead in demonstrating to the whole Africa through the chief imam going to churches to kind of give speeches and also inviting other church leaders to come to Islamic mosques and kind of have, let me say, a friendly conversations just to demonstrate the peaceful coexistence. And one thing the Muslim Islam community is also doing is building of schools. So schools in Ghana basically were kind of built by the missionaries, even though the government kind of now the government has taken control of most of the schools in Ghana. It's now public now. The Muslim communities have now also invested in building of schools to kind of give people equal opportunity in having a formal education. So these schools do not only teach what we term as a Western form of education, they also teaches Islamic values. So me, for example, I went to a Islamic senior high school back in Ghana. So which was built by the Muslim community. So the government has kind of absorbed these schools to kind of finance the schools. So now, even though the Muslim community built it, but the government has absorbed it. And now the schools kind of accept not only Muslims, it accepts Christians or like any other religious groups to the schools, just as also a sign of showing peaceful coexistence in the country. Yes, and also there are some Muslim bodies that are also now trying to build hospitals to kind of give equal access to healthcare among the Islamic community. So these health services are kind of, let me say, built in the Islamic communities. So you don't see more of different people coming from a different community to come to these hospitals. However, for the schools, it kind of accommodates everybody. Even though the health care services that the uh, Islamic institutions are providing are kind of for everyone, but because it's based in the Islamic community, like you don't see like more of a different people coming there. Also, one thing I would say I'm happy like seeing the Muslim community champion is girl child education. So for a while, like I would say, like I will not shy away from it. Like women were kind of sidelined when it came to education in the Islamic community. However, now Islamic leaders have realized that educating women is kind of even more beneficial than educating men alone, because the women, they make our homes, they are more closer to children than even the men. However, not educating them is not educating the younger ones. So now women are kind of being encouraged to go to the universities to have their PhDs. Yes, so women are now encouraged to do more. However, some of the roles that I would say women are not encouraged to do is leadership positions. Yes, that I think it all comes to the Islamic values. So Islam kind of put the man as the leader of the woman. That one I will I will be like factual about it. So women are, even though they are women who try to go into leadership role, however, their leadership role is limited among the women group. So you can get a woman serving as, let me say, an Islamic cleric, but she preaches more to the women than the men. So the idea of that, of not allowing women and men to kind of mingle together, is to kind of limit, let me say, the gazes, or the some men are seen as being like hypersexual. Therefore, to kind of limit their gaze to women is kind of having separating the women from the men, to kind of, let me say, not put them in a position that will make them commit something that Islam doesn't frown on. Islam frown on, sorry. Yes, and one thing I'll also add on what Islam is doing in kind of contributing to the country as Ghana, as I mentioned, is like encouraging people to take political roles. So now we are having some member of parliament in Ghana who are Muslims. So it is a conscious effort to kind of have these people in parliament so that they can also influence policies that will also favor the Islamic community.
So that way you have representation of concerns and needs of the Muslim communities in the country.
Yes,
It's
yes,
being
exactly,
represented. Yeah,
exactly.
it's very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This was a very interesting and informative conversation. I would like to offer up to you now, just if you want to add any closing remarks, anything you hope that students can understand on this, what we've shared today, or any strong points you want to leave for us before we end this together.
Okay, so one thing I would like to add is Africa is made of 54 countries. So sometimes the experience of a Ghanaian in a Ghanaian setting might be different from a South African in a South African setting. However, even though we all identify ourselves as Africans, we have different cultures, different languages, and different way of life. So even though religion has come to shape our way of life generally, we still maintain our own traditional way of life, like let me say, like our sense of community. Yes, it is still relevant in the African setup. So the sense of community in Ghana is not far different from the sense of community, let me say, in South Africa. So even though we are different people, but there's some certain kind of characteristics that we all have in common. So one thing I will say is the sense of community, which kind of it cut across the whole of Africa, if I may say. So for example, if you live in a community and it's like your wife or God has blessed you with a baby, like the whole community will come and kind of wish you well and kind of join you in celebration. So in your bad times as well, the community does not neglect you to kind of solve your own problem, whether it's monetarily or like it could be maybe an emotional support. The community will show up at your door to kind of show you a lot of love and a lot of concern. I think this is one thing that kind of that is quite universal among the African countries. Yes.
Thank you for those distinctions. Yeah, and sharing how important that is. Yeah. Mhm.
So one thing I would like to leave is the idea that Christianity was not in Africa before the Europeans came. I would like to challenge that because according to some historians, prominent historians in Ghana, like Edubuahin, we find out that when the Portuguese came to Ghana in 1471, they were looking for a Christian king named Karamasa, but we think the name is Mansa. So they had an idea of a Christian king already in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes. So that is one of the things I would like to leave. And also, I would like to say that churches in Ghana are stepping up, even though they can do more. We think they are doing they are doing well, and there's room for more improvements. And also, churches they've done more good than harm than most of the ideas people have that Christianity in Ghana only came to pave the way for enslavement and colonialism. Even though it came with some negatives, but it also came with a lot of positives as well. It came to end certain traditional practices which were not very good. And also it also helped us integrate Africa or Ghana into the global world. So that's what I like to give the class with. Especially they should try and remember Ken Kwamasa or Ken Kwamansa. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for making that advocacy that we do tend to think of Christianity as more of the destructive elements on the African continent. I mean, I shouldn't say we, but many, we tend to emphasize those when we teach history. And we don't speak about other than, bringing European languages. There's other benefits. And both of you have really highlighted so much about the history and the grounding of the beliefs and then how that's intersecting with contemporary society. I'm very appreciative of our time together today. I want to thank you. And should they come and visit Ghana someday?
Yes, I think Ghana is, if I may say, the gateway to Africa. So most people who want to experience Africa usually choose Ghana to be their first country. Yes, I don't know if I show speed. There's a streamer who was visiting the whole of Africa. I think he was in Ghana and he kind of appreciate his stay in Ghana. And anyone who comes to Ghana like will attest to the rich culture that is in Ghana. Yes.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and we hope to support you in your journey here at Indiana State University, and we're very appreciative of you sharing today. So we'll end this session, and this will be available on YouTube, so we can all watch it later. Okay. Take care and have a wonderful day, and let me know how we can be a part of your lives. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.